The moment those 7 words detonated across screens, it didn't feel like a routine palace update. It felt like a controlled explosion buried deep inside centuries of royal secrecy. Princess Anne rejects Sussex Dina memorandum succession. 7 words, but behind them, a storm that had been quietly building, unseen, unspoken, and now impossible to contain. At exactly 6:59 a.m., while the world was still stretching awake, insiders froze, because this wasn't just another headline about Prince Harry or Meghan Markle. This was something far more dangerous. This was the monarchy being forced to answer a question it had spent generations carefully avoiding: what actually makes someone royal? And suddenly, the answer wasn't as simple as blood. Because behind closed doors, something extraordinary had already happened. Harry's team, working far away from palace corridors deep in California, had assembled what they believed would be their ultimate weapon. Not rumors, not titles, not ceremony. Pure biological proof. Cold, scientific, undeniable. The logic seemed airtight. If Harry is the father, then the children are his. If the children are his, they are Windsor. And if they are Windsor, then they belong in the royal line. Simple, clean, final, except it wasn't. Because Princess Anne didn't just reject the claim, she dismantled it. Calmly, precisely, almost brutally. In just 2 sentences, she shattered the entire foundation Harry's team had built, not by denying the science, but by exposing something far more unsettling. This was never about science. This was about power. Private laboratories do not determine succession. That line alone sent shockwaves through legal circles. Because what Anne was really saying, without ever raising her voice, was that dinner means nothing if the institution refuses to recognize it. And that's when everything shifted, because suddenly this wasn't about proving paternity anymore. It was about proving legitimacy. And legitimacy in the world of crowns and thrones doesn't come from a test tube, it comes from rules. Ancient rules. Rules written long before Harry was even a thought. Rules that don't bend just because the modern world demands they should. By mid-morning, the palace had already moved into a level of operation rarely seen. Quietly, efficiently, almost like it had been waiting for this moment. The Sovereign Succession Security Council, silent for decades, was reactivated. That alone was enough to make seasoned royal reporters uneasy, because this wasn't a PR situation. This was a constitutional crisis. Names began appearing, not celebrities, not spokespersons, real power players, judges, historians, intelligence figures, people who don't show up unless something serious is unfolding behind the curtain. And within hours, they were all inside Marlborough House. Doors closed, no leaks, no smiles, just silence. And then came the 3 categories. 3 carefully documented concerns that transformed what looked like a simple claim into something far more complicated and far more explosive. The first, photographs, official palace images, but not just any images, images that analysts now claimed showed inconsistencies, subtle, technical, but enough to raise questions about the natural progression of pregnancy. The second, procedure. Because in royal tradition, a birth isn't just a private event, it's a verified moment of state importance. Witnessed, signed, recorded, locked into history. Except, in this case, something was missing. A signature. One missing verification from a specific royal medical authority. And in normal circumstances, that might be brushed aside. A technicality. A formality. But here, it became everything. Because without it, the birth didn't meet the requirements that centuries of royal law quietly depended on. And then, the third category. The one that made even hardened observers pause. A financial transfer. $49,900. Sent days before the birth announcement, labeled in a way that didn't sound ceremonial, didn't sound traditional, didn't sound royal at all. It sounded transactional. And suddenly, the narrative began to fracture. Because now the question wasn't just, are these Harry's children? The question became far more dangerous. Under what conditions were they brought into the world, and do those conditions matter? By the time Prince Harry stepped onto UK soil again, escorted through a wall of silence, the situation had already spiraled beyond control. He looked exhausted, not just physically, but like someone who had realized too late that the rules of the game were never what he thought they were. He cooperated fully, agreed to official DNA testing under strict protocols, military-level custody, no loopholes, no doubts. And when the results came in, they confirmed exactly what he had been saying all along. He was the father, undeniable, absolute, final. But instead of ending the controversy, it made things worse, because the commission didn't celebrate the results. out. They added a note, a single devastating clarification that even if a child carries royal blood, that alone does not grant royal status. Because in this world, this ancient unyielding system, blood is only part of the equation. The rest, procedure, protocol, approval. And without those, everything else becomes irrelevant. At the public session, the tension became visible. Experts presented their findings like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit. Images, records, financial trails, each one adding weight to a conclusion nobody wanted to say out loud. Harry's legal team pushed back hard, arguing that truth, biological truth, should outweigh outdated formalities. But then came the response that cut through everything. In monarchy, ceremony is law-given flesh, and just like that, the entire argument collapsed because this wasn't a modern system. It was an old one, and old systems don't change easily. While all of this unfolded, King Charles III remained silent, watching, waiting, calculating. And Prince William, he didn't address it directly, but a single offhand remark caught accidentally spread faster than any official statement. Fix the old stones, don't replace the foundation. And people understood exactly what that meant, because this wasn't just about Harry anymore. This was about the survival of the institution itself. And by the time Parliament began moving at record speed to codify rules that had once been unwritten, it became clear. This wasn't a temporary crisis. This was a turning point, a line being drawn, quietly, permanently. And somewhere in all of this, one question refused to go away. If Didina isn't enough, then what is? Because whatever the answer is, it's not written in blood. It's written in power. And just when it seemed like the storm had already reached its peak, the real shift began, not in the headlines, not in the courtrooms, but deep inside the machinery of power where decisions are made long before the public even realizes something has changed. Because while the world was still arguing over Dina, legality, and morality, the institution had already moved forward, quietly, decisively, without asking for permission. By March 27th, the silence broke. King Charles III issued the instrument. No dramatic speech, no emotional appeal, just a formal declaration, cold, precise, irreversible. The princely styles of Archie and Lilibet suspended, not debated, not delayed, suspended. And that single move sent a shockwave through every level of public consciousness, because it confirmed what many had begun to fear. This was no longer a question under review, it was a decision already made. Inside the chamber the next day, the atmosphere turned almost surreal. Witnesses spoke, evidence was projected, arguments were made, but underneath it all, there was a growing awareness that the outcome had already been written somewhere long before anyone stepped into that room. High-resolution stills filled the screens, analyzed, dissected, scrutinized like pieces of forensic evidence in a case that felt less like a family dispute and more like a state investigation. Medical testimonies followed, procedural breakdowns, financial trails, each one layered carefully, building a narrative that didn't scream accusations, but whispered implications so heavy they didn't need to be shouted. And through it all, Prince Harry sat there, no longer the rebellious prince, no longer the outsider speaking from afar, but a man watching the system he was born into close ranks in a way he had never seen before. Because this wasn't personal anymore, this was structural. When his legal counsel made one final push, arguing that truth, that biology, that undeniable scientific facts should outweigh what they called ceremonial technicalities, the response didn't come with anger, it came with clarity. A calm voice cutting through the noise with a sentence that felt like it had been waiting centuries to be spoken again. In monarchy, ceremony is law-given flesh, and in that moment, something invisible snapped. Because that line didn't just end the argument, it exposed the entire framework. This was never a modern system trying to adapt. This was an ancient system defending itself. And outside those walls, the world reacted instantly. Debate exploded. Social media fractured into sides. Some called it outdated, even cruel, an institution clinging to archaic rules in a modern age. Others defended it fiercely, arguing that without those very rules, the monarchy would collapse into chaos. But while the public argued, Parliament moved. Fast. Too fast. Within days, something that had existed as tradition, something quietly understood but never fully written into modern statutory law, was suddenly being transformed into something permanent, the born of the body doctrine. No longer just a principle whispered through legal circles and royal archives. Now it was becoming law. And the speed of it, that's what made insiders uneasy. Because legislation at this level doesn't move quickly unless there is urgency. And urgency means one thing: the system felt threatened. The bills surged through the House of Commons, debated, challenged, defended, but never truly slowed down. By the time the votes were counted, the result was decisive: 312 to 118. Not even close. And just like that, centuries of ambiguity vanished, replaced by a clear, unyielding legal framework that left no room for interpretation, no room for negotiation, no room for exceptions. Across the Atlantic, the reaction was very different. Silence at first, then small signs. Projects quietly paused, partnerships reconsidered, and whispers, those same whispers that had followed Meghan Markle and Harry for years, began shifting tone. Not louder, just sharper. Friends close to Harry described a man who felt blindsided not by the decision itself, but by how quickly everything had closed in around him. One reported phrase surfaced again and again, almost like a quiet confession: "If duty is the rent, I've paid mine with interest." But the system doesn't calculate emotional currency. It calculates stability. And stability at that moment meant drawing a line so firm it could never be questioned again. Meanwhile, Prince William moved differently. No direct statements, no visible reaction to the storm. Instead, presence, appearances, engagements, a deliberate shift toward visibility that didn't feel accidental. Because while one side of the story was collapsing under scrutiny, the other side was quietly reinforcing itself. At St. George's Chapel, during the annual service, something subtle happened. Something that would have been missed if not for a single microphone picking up a single sentence. Asked how to fix something so old, William didn't hesitate. Use new tools, but never discard the foundation. And that line spread like wildfire, because it wasn't just an answer, it was a message, a signal, a quiet confirmation that the future of the monarchy wouldn't come from rewriting its rules, but from enforcing them more precisely than ever before. And then came Easter, a moment that under normal circumstances would have been ceremonial, predictable, almost routine. But this time, every word mattered, every pause, every syllable. King Charles III stood before the public and delivered a blessing, not just for those within the institution, but for all children wherever they may be raised. And that phrase lingered because it sounded inclusive, compassionate, almost gentle, but beneath it there was distance, a line carefully drawn between acknowledgement and acceptance. By St. George's Day, the final piece fell into place. Princess Anne was asked a question that seemed simple on the surface, almost philosophical. Does history ever end? Her response? Chilling in its simplicity. History ends every morning and starts again at tea time. And just like that, the entire saga was reframed. Because this wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about controlling the present, so the future could never question it. By summer, the transformation was complete. Britain wasn't just dealing with a controversy anymore. It had stepped into a new legal reality, one where the question had finally been answered. Not emotionally, not politically, but structurally. Is monarchy something you were born into, or something that must be formally recognized, verified, and sealed by the system itself? And the answer was no longer open for debate. But even with all the laws rewritten, all the statements issued, all the decisions finalized, one uncomfortable truth remained. Because systems can enforce rules, they can redefine legitimacy, they can even silence controversy, but they cannot control perception forever. And somewhere, quietly, beneath all the official conclusions and legal frameworks, the question still lingers. Not loudly, not publicly, but persistently. If blood isn't enough, then what happens when belief begins to fade? Because institutions don't just survive on rules, they survive on trust. And trust, once shaken, doesn't rebuild as easily as law.